Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today, a relatively defining point of the trip. When we lived in the UK, we came to the view that the UK was actually a really nice place to live. And although we had a time to go back to the US and, there were a variety of circumstances which led us to return to the US, but the thought was always the case that at some stage, maybe in later life, we would retire to the UK. Now, in parallel to this, there's been a lot of negative media associated with the UK over the past decade or so, and we really weren't sure what the UK was anymore. When we returned to London, we spent time in Heathrow and exiting Heathrow, and that gives you a very distinct perspective on the UK, which is in large part completely artificial. After the evening of the needle slicing, I was not particularly lucid. Maybe lucid is not the term. I was still relatively tired. And with this, when my wife said to me, "What do you want to do today?" I said to her, "I want to go to Wilmslow. I want to wander around Wilmslow, go back to the house that we lived in. I want to get a sense of the place. I want to get a sense of what Wilmslow is today." So we went back. Initially, my wife had other plans, but we decided to go to the house that we once lived in. While we were at the house, the current renter of the house drove up. We explained who we were, asked a few questions. He told us that the neighbouring house had been sold recently, which was also owned by the people that we rented from. But as a renter, he was perfectly happy where he was, and they weren't going to be selling the house that he was currently renting. What occurred to me following this was that potentially sometime in the future the owners might sell the property, the one that's currently rented, that we had rented for 3.5 years, but also really that Wilmslow was something that needed to be walked through and discovered. So my wife went off to do her shopping, and I decided to walk through Wilmslow to the realtors that had historically rented us the property that we lived in, but also to have an opportunity to talk with the realtors associated with what the current prices were, how much the house next door to the property that we had rented had sold for, and just get general ballparks for the area. This was a very positive experience. I'm now on the guy's mailing list. He's sending me periodic emails associated with various properties. And our thought is we should probably move from having a rental property in Las Vegas to having a rental property in the UK, if nothing more, to really manifest the thought that sometime in the future, when we are old and doddery, we will have paid off a property in an area that we want to live versus having a property paid off in Las Vegas. I proceeded to walk around Wilmslow for quite some time, actually. I had a friend who I was meeting in the late afternoon, early evening, so I knew I had a bit of time there, and I utilised this to really get back to Wilmslow, get to a sense of how much had changed, what was still there, what was going on. And the thing that struck me about it was that so little had changed. Now, a bit had changed, a few of the stores had changed hands, but the stuff that I remember and the stuff that I really liked was still there in spades. And living in an environment where, neighbours have their windows, their car windows shot out periodically, when there's a sense of crime that is relatively rampant and somewhat curious, the thought of wandering round a Cheshire town that borders Manchester and has fields and smokehouses and a variety of nice little things that are basically exactly the same as when we lived there, that was so unbelievably appealing to us. And it made me think that although I try to, in some regard, convey the notion that I'm a relatively modern dude, there are still some conservative elements within me just when I see these places that haven't changed and still hold some of the whimsy that I really liked when I lived there. So, my wife and I have made a promise that there will be some Wilmslow in our future, and the timeframes associated with this. I mean, obviously things are still chugging along here in San Jose, but we both have reaffirmed the idea that fundamentally the UK is where we'd like to be. In some long term, somewhere in the future. Slowly manifesting itself through finding a property, transitioning the Vegas property by selling it into some capital that can go into a property in the UK, and then periodically visiting just to see that things are still plodding along in a direction that we are relatively sympathetic towards. In this light, I did a lot of reflecting associated with, experiences in the US versus experiences in the UK. My wife obviously did the same, and I think probably somewhere through these short funk recordings, There'll be something that'll come through this in the future of general discussion. But really, it isn't a change of any of our general plans, it's just more formalising the aspects of that. So sometime in the future, perhaps the distant future, we will have this place to return to. I've often joked with folks that this area is sort of like the Alamo for us, that if everything else goes terribly wrong, at least we'll have a place somewhere. That the kind of work, the kind of effort, the kind of money that needs to be generated to make this thing real, it's enough to draw a breath. There could be potential in the future for work in the UK, but for now, the US, in particular the San Jose Bay Area, Silicon Valley fundamentally, is where I'm going to have to stay. Tom Barbalet, in that particular part of the world, signing out.